We have to tempt the Arabs into the right path, detach them from the enemy, and bring them over to our side. This, on our part, is at present largely a matter of words, and to succeed, we must use persuasive terms and abstain from haggling over conditions. These memorable words about the British policy towards the Arabs during World War I were uttered by Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner in Cairo. It lays bare the deceptive trap the British prepared for the Arabs in the First World War. I am Dr. Hassan Bukhari, and this is the second episode of our series Palestine versus Israel. In the previous episode, we had observed that the Zionist ambitions in Palestine were being hindered by the Ottoman government in Palestine. Up until the First World War, the Zionists had not been able to get much support from any major European power for their goal of creating a Jewish state in Palestine. But the First World War brought great changes to the world order, and many ambitions that had seemed impossible now entered the realm of possibility. We are concerned with two such projects, that is, the prospect of a Jewish state in Palestine and the prospect of an Arab empire, including modern day Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, and of course Palestine. The most influential Arab lord in the Ottoman Empire, Sharif Hussein bin Ali, the ruler of Hijaz and the custodian of the Muslim holy cities of Mecca and Medina, was a very ambitious man. He resented any Ottoman central government encroachment on his authority. In 1900, Sultan Abdul Hamid II embarked on a grand project called the Hijaz Railway to build a railway from Istanbul to Mecca. This railway aimed to facilitate the Muslim holy pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, and to facilitate Ottoman military transport across Arabia in order to bring it under more secure central control. But the local tribal chiefs even went to the extent of sponsoring armed raids on the railway to sabotage the project. They thought that this railway would curtail their autonomy and power in the Hijaz. They also wanted to preserve the camel transport business in Hijaz, which would have been rendered obsolete due to the new railway. In 1908, the Ottoman Sultan compromised and halted the railway at Medina. In the same year, Hussein bin Ali was appointed the Sharif of Mecca by the Ottoman government. In February 1914, fearful that the Ottomans might start to extend the Hijaz railway towards Mecca, Sharif Hussein sent his son Abdullah to Egypt, which was under British rule then. Abdullah met then British Consul General in Cairo, Lord Kitchener. He requested British diplomatic and military support for a rebellion in Arabia against the Ottomans. Kitchener declined this request. The British government didn't want the Ottoman Empire to disintegrate at that point, and hadn't even ruled out the possibility of making the Ottoman Empire an ally against their German rivals. Kitchener also probably didn't think too highly of Sharif Hussein and wasn't sure of his capability to launch an effective rebellion. Like all astute politicians, he was loath to bet on a seemingly losing horse. But the scenario greatly changed in November 1914 when the British Empire, Russia and France declared war on the Ottoman Empire. Now, Britain wanted the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire promptly and was ready to accept any allies. Lord Kitchener, now the British War Secretary, sent a message to Sharif Hussein via Ronald Storrs, who was the Oriental Secretary in Cairo then. Storrs was to inform Hussein that in return for any assistance the Arab nation might give to the British, they would defend the Arabs against external aggression, protect Hussein against internal threats, and support the principle that an Arab of true race might become caliph in Mecca. This message with embellishments by Stores, was delivered to Hussein and created the basis for a relationship that lasted throughout the war. Shortly after the British declaration of war against the Ottoman Empire, the young and enthusiastic First Lord of Admiralty Winston Churchill devised a plan to quickly knock the weak Ottoman Empire out of the war. Churchill proposed that an Allied naval force, accompanied by a landing occupation force, should force the Dardanelles Straits and threaten Istanbul directly. Churchill thought that this would force the Ottoman government to sue for peace and usher in a relatively cheap victory for the Allies. The war against the Germans on the Western Front had bogged down in trench warfare and was proving a stalemate till then. So in February 1915, an Allied naval force launched an attack on the Dardanelles, but contrary to Churchill's expectations, the attack resulted in utter failure. Many ships were lost and more than 700 sailors were killed for no gain at all. Undeterred, the Allies raised the stakes and started landing massive forces on the Gallipoli Peninsula. Their plan was to crush the supposedly weak Ottoman defenses in Gallipoli and then march up to Istanbul, but they were again thwarted by tenacious Ottoman defenders led by a German general Liman von Sanders and Mustafa Kemal Pasha, who later became the founder of modern Turkey. By July 1915, it had become clear to the British that the Ottoman Empire was a much stronger and more steadfast enemy than they had expected. It was decided to accelerate efforts to weaken the Ottoman enemy from within, as it had proven difficult to destroy it from without. So, when the British High Commissioner in Cairo, Henry McMahon, received Sharif Hussein's letter dated 14 July 1915, asking for British help in establishing his own Arab empire, the British government gave the green light to McMahon to engage him and encourage him to launch a rebellion against the Ottomans. In his first letter to McMahon, Sharif Hussein had demanded the territory encompassing modern-day Saudi Arabia, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, Palestine, and even some parts of Turkey be included in his Arab empire. He also requested that British give him full military support in removing the Ottoman forces from these lands. In return, he offered to accept British rule over some Arab lands such as Egypt and Aden in Yemen. He also promised to grant economic preference to Britain in his Arab empire, thus excluding all of Britain's rivals from the economic and strategic benefits his envisioned empire could offer. McMahon agreed to help Sharif Hussein in his reply, but remained silent about endorsing the boundaries of the future Arab empire as demanded by Sharif Hussein. Sharif Hussein was annoyed by this and again asked McMahon to resolve the issue of the boundaries, as it was pivotal to the success of the negotiations. Finally, McMahon wrote to Sharif Hussein on 24 October 1915 and stated that in the areas where Great Britain is free to act without detriment to the interests of her ally France, it pledged to recognize and uphold the independence of the Arabs in all the regions lying within the frontiers proposed by the Sharif of Mecca, and to protect the holy places against external aggression. These areas appear to include, at the least, central Syria including Damascus, Homs, Hama, and Aleppo, northern Iraq, and Arabia. McMahon's letters, read in the context of the message sent by Lord Kitchener to Ronald Stores, clearly implied that the British would recognize the independence of a new Arab empire under Sharif Hussein that would include Arabia, Iraq, Palestine, and parts of Syria. Almost simultaneously, the British were negotiating the partition of the Ottoman Middle East with their French allies. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, named for the British diplomat Mark Sykes and the French diplomat François-Georges Picot, was officially ratified in May 1916. It defined areas of direct and indirect British and French control in Arab lands and southeast Turkey. The French were allotted Lebanon and coastal Syria as their areas of direct control, along with Cilicia and southeastern Turkey. Their sphere of indirect influence included the rest of Syria from just west of the districts of Damascus, Homs, Hama, and Aleppo through northern Iraq, including Mosul, to the Iranian border. Southern Iraq, including Baghdad, and the Palestinian ports of Haifa and Acre were allotted to the British, while the rest of the Palestine was to be placed under an international regime. One cannot help but notice that the British had promised many areas to both the French and the Arabs. They wanted to use these contradictory promises to wiggle out of their commitments to both their allies and create the space for the realization of their own objectives in the Middle East. The British desired an overland route through the Middle East to their Indian colony. They had envisioned a railway from Haifa to Baghdad and Basra. They also wanted the oil wells of Mosul. In short, all the British promises were subject to the British imperialist desire to control Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq after the victory over the Ottoman Empire. Diplomatic promises count for naught if not backed up by hard power. That is why the British devoted huge military resources to the campaigns in the Middle East. This was done to ensure that after the war, the British boots on the ground would ensure a final settlement complementary to the British imperialist ambitions. Deceived by the British promises, Sharif Hussain launched the Arab Revolt in 1916. The Arab Revolt caused much inconvenience to the embattled Ottoman Empire, which quickly lost control over a major portion of the Hijaz, including the holy city of Mecca. Facing the British army in front and the Arab rebels from behind, the outnumbered and outgunned Ottoman forces were pushed on the back foot. In March 1917, finally, the British won their first major victory of the First World War in the Middle East when they captured Baghdad. But all wasn't going well in the war for the British and their allies. At the same time the British were waving their flag over Baghdad, their Russian ally was experiencing a cataclysmic revolution. The centuries-old Russian monarchy was abolished and a new government took its place, which was dominated by socialists. The Russian Revolution generated grave doubts about Russia's continued participation in the war against Germany. At that time, it was mistakenly believed that the Jews were the pivotal but unseen force behind the Russian Revolution. The British Zionists, led by the formidable Dr. Chaim Weizmann, encouraged this fantasy of Jewish power in Russia to further their own aims. According to Professor Charles Smith, concern that Russia might withdraw from the war, permitting the Germans to concentrate all their forces against France and Britain in the West, led to efforts to promote Zionism as a means of persuading Russian Jews, believed to be influential in revolutionary circles, to support Russia's war effort. London Zionists encouraged this idea in order to foster official British sentiment for a pro-Zionist declaration, even though they knew that no such Russian Jewish backing for the war effort existed. Dr. Chaim Weizmann, a scientist in the field of biochemistry who had aided British munitions production greatly through his discoveries, expertly lobbied high British officials including Mark Sykes, Winston Churchill, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, and Prime Minister David Lloyd George to declare Palestine as a national home for the Jews. The British were also influenced by the Zionist influence in the USA, where a Supreme Court judge, Louis Brandeis, was heading the Zionist movement. Brandeis had access to US President Woodrow Wilson, and he had been openly advocating for the establishment of a Zionist Jewish state in Palestine. He had declared in 1915 that the Zionists believe that only in Palestine can Jewish life be fully protected from the forces of disintegration. that there alone can the Jewish spirit reach its full and natural development, and that by securing for those Jews who wish to settle there the opportunity to do so, not only those Jews, but all other Jews will be benefited, and that the long perplexing Jewish problem will at last find solution. With the continuance of Russian participation in the war in doubt, the British were hoping and pleading for help from the USA. So in order to placate the Zionists to ensure Russian and US active participation in the war against Germany, Britain decided to issue a pro-Zionist declaration in a cabinet meeting on the 31st of October 1917. At that meeting, the Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour argued that from a purely diplomatic and political point of view, it was desirable that some declaration favorable to the aspiration of the Jewish nationalists should now be made. The vast majority of Jews in Russia and America, as indeed all over the world, now appeared to be favorable to Zionism. If we could make a declaration favorable to such an ideal, we should be able to carry on extremely useful propaganda both in Russia and in America. On the 2nd of November 1917, the Balfour Declaration was issued. Leading Zionists like Dr. Weizmann and Lord Walter Rothschild were consulted prior to the issuance of the declaration, and the declaration itself was issued in the form of a letter to Lord Rothschild. It stated, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use its best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country." The Balfour Declaration was bound to incur the wrath of Arab nationalists and Sharif Hussain, who were fighting the Ottomans in the belief that Britain would back their bid for a united Arab empire from Palestine to Hijaz after the war. In order to lure the Arabs into a false sense of security, Mark Sykes wrote a declaration that referred to the Arabs' achievement of independence as a nation and proclaimed the British government's support for Jewish aspirations to return to Palestine only in as far as is compatible with the freedom of the existing population, both economic and political. Interestingly, when the British managed to expel the Ottomans from the Syrian capital of Damascus in the autumn of 1918, they led the Arab forces led by Sharif Hussein's son Faisal bin Hussein to enter the city first as a liberator, even though his forces hadn't played a major role in that campaign. By doing so, the British aimed to pressurize the French, to whom they had promised to give Syria in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. When the First World War in the Middle East ended with the Ottoman capitulation on the 31st of October 1918, the future of this region was far from certain. The British had made tall promises to the Arabs, French, and the Zionists, all the while intending to keep none of them. They were determined to achieve their own imperialist aim of dominating the region from Palestine to Iraq, and hoped to use the conflicts between all the other parties to their own advantage. They were in a better position to impose their will on the others, because after the Ottoman defeat, they now commanded by far the strongest military force in Palestine. They had expertly utilized deception to excel at warfare and diplomacy. Both Machiavelli and Sun Tzu would be proud. In the next episode of Palestine versus Israel, we will discuss the French conquest of Syria, the end of Sharif Hussein's family's ambitions of ruling a united Arab empire, the British government in Palestine, British discriminatory policies against the Arabs, the formation of a shadow Zionist state complete with its own military and political institutions, and the bloody 1929 riots which resulted in the deaths of hundreds of Jews and Arabs. Stay tuned, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.